Hello, everybody. Welcome to the UMassSafe CV-STAC webinar series on innovative initiatives in CDL compliance and safety. My name's Robin Reisman. I'm the director of UMassSafe, and we're really glad to have you here today. This webinar and the CV-STAC website is funded with a grant from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and we're especially thankful to have their support. This is the 8th in the 9-part series. If you're interested in information on some of the other webinars that were held in this series, please go to the CV-STAC website. We have all the previous webinars posted there, as well as information on future webinars there. We also have blogs and topical information and best practice guides there, all of which may be helpful. So today we have Jeremy Pate. He's from the Center for Advanced Public Safety from the University of Alabama, and he's going to be presenting on their eCVSP metrics monitoring project. After he gives his presentation, there'll be lots of time for questions and answers, so we encourage you to be thinking about questions and dialogue. At that point, you can either type questions into the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask those questions. I know Jeremy's eager for that discussion at the end. Before he begins, let me just tell you a little bit about him. So Jeremy is the Associate Director of Technology at the Center for Advanced Public Safety, or CAPS as they call it, at the University of Alabama. CAPS is a 125-person research and development organization, and it involves faculty and research scientists, engineers, and students, all dedicated to innovation in traffic safety and public safety technology. Jeremy has led a number of statewide traffic safety projects in a number of states, including Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. These projects include electronic citations, electronic crash reporting, decision support systems, and a multitude of other traffic safety systems. He's also participated in a number of safety projects in New Mexico and Georgia. He received his Master's of Computer Science from the University of Alabama and is currently pursuing a PhD in computer science also at the University of Alabama. So he has a lot of expertise to share with us. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Robin. I always hate giving introductions, so it's really great to have that already done for me. So I really appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? For anyone that can actually...
Yes, I think everyone can hear you.
Okay, great. And you're able to see the presentation?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Just want to be sure. And I never know, I never know with Zoom and things like that. So,
right.
Again, thank you for the introduction. What I'm here today to talk about is REACH, and we really love our acronyms, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But this is the eCVSP, or Electronic Commercial Vehicle Safety Plan Metrics Monitoring Project that we've been working on in concert with FMCSA as part of a MXAP High Priority grant. There was a secondary component of that grant that was also a conference that was held at Tuscaloosa on the campus of the University of Alabama back earlier in the year. And as part of that, I did do a presentation that was similar to this, but we've actually made some advances. So you're seeing some things that people haven't seen before related to this project. So a little bit of background, really the proposal and sort of the problem statement that we ran into is, and this was from background from Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, as well as some other state enforcement agencies that deal with commercial vehicle enforcement. A lot of their planning is sort of coming up with their commercial vehicle safety plan, sort of manually comparing those, even with digital data collection tools. And there's a sort of a coalescing process that happens near each one of the quarterly reports to compare with the CVSP that is often error prone, it's time consuming, and it's labor intensive. There's usually some 1 or 2 people in the office that are experts on that process and have to collate all that information together, near the end of the time when the quarterly reports actually due. And so this was a process to sort of identify any potential benefits that we could find, or any potential processes that we could identify to create a system to not only automate the process of getting the data back in, but also comparing it automatically to CVSP goals and making that more of an interactive process rather than just you're comparing them in a static fashion at the end of each quarter. So really the problems that we looked at are manual comparison. So someone would take a spreadsheet of data or even take it from an analytics system and then compare that to the CVSP goals. We wanted to automate that. It was error prone. Sometimes you would run into copy paste errors, or you would just, anytime you move data from one system to another, you introduce the possibility for error. So I wanted to try to take as much of the manual data entry process and calculation out as possible. So for accuracy's sake, time consuming, it would be nice if this didn't have to be done manually. So we want to try to make that fast. Also wanted to remove that as a responsibility. So to make this process easy for everyone. And then with quarterly comparisons, we also wanted to make it as frequent as that, but potentially more frequently, because you can't change what you don't measure. And so the more frequently you can do the measurements, you may be able to get a little bit more of an idea what's happening in the in-between between the quarterly reports that you're putting together and pushing out. So the approach that we took after we did an examination of the problem and had several meetings to talk about the major issues is we want to give the user some actionable information. So data in and of itself isn't necessarily useful unless you do something with it or make a decision with it. So we wanted to really give you the idea quickly, some information that you can use to possibly make a practical change in enforcement planning. And then the second thing was we don't want to make the user come to the system. As proud as we are of technology that we work on, obviously as a computer science background, I like creating systems, but giving someone another website they have to go to and another username and password is not really a great way to have them be grateful for that process. It has to really be that, really be great for someone want to remember another username and password, frankly. So we wanted to try to have some passive processes that push things informationally to users through email and other means. And then the third one, and I think this is the biggest one, is there are some augmentation machine learning aspects to it that we're looking at in the background, and that's sort of handled transparently. And so as a part of that, we want to make an assistant necessarily. We want to make an augmentation tool and not a replacement for any person. So that person that's actually going through and doing all that data aggregation, doing the analysis, we're not looking to replace him or her. We're really looking to give them a tool. Instead of using a long division, we want to give them a calculator so they can start to focus on the really hard things that people are good at, and that's doing the critical thinking once they're presented with the data. So our solution is called REACH, and we really love acronyms here at CAPS. And so what that stands for is a Rapid eCVSP Activity Comparison Helper. We've even put an acronym in an acronym, so we feel pretty proud of that. The colors chosen for the logo are not accidental. We really wanted to give this idea of a green, yellow, and red status for where you are in terms of meeting in risk of not meeting your goals or you've already passed your goals. More specifically, you think of it like a traffic light. So when the light is red, you stop, you have to change something. You have to, put your foot on the brake, or you have to, you've presented with something that's an immovable force. I mean, you could run the red light, but let's assume everyone's law abiding and actually stops at the red lights. But you really can evaluate at that point what went wrong and then what can be done the next time. You've already passed that goal. You may have missed that, but what can you learn from that? Because at least if you fail and you learn from it, there is some value there. In this middle tier, in the warning, that's where we really wanted to focus our time, because targets are very easy to see that you're on target or that you've met it, and also when you failed. But we want to try to make a little bit of help, or add a little bit of help for the user to be able to see, when am I at risk? When does it look like I'm not going to meet the goal at the current rate that I'm going? So, with a yellow light, you either have to speed up or slow down. You have to make a decision. You're either going to, go with the status quo, or you're going to have to slow down and stop at that light, and you have to do something to make a change. And so if you're presented with that warning, what's going on right now that's wrong, and what can be done at this moment to potentially correct and keep you back on target. And then green, if for nothing else, you can see that you're on target and you can keep up that particular action until you get a notification that you're going in a different direction. So what's going right, and what can you potentially learn from those successes? What are things that are going well there It's almost like you're running, small experiments that you can see what's going well as opposed to the other side, what's going wrong, and you can start to potentially apply some of those things to other avenues of enforcement. So there's a concept that's important to make a distinction on, because we've dealt here at CAPS for a long time on passive goal systems. And really all I mean when I say passive goal system is it shows you what you're doing, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what you're doing in terms of any sort of context. A lot of tools that are, when you look at a chart that tells you how many crashes you have, for instance, it may or may not be in the context of where you want to be. So the system isn't really able to help you or able to tell you where you are. You have to provide that information as context when you're doing your examination. So as an example of a passive system as opposed to REACH, which is an active system, we have had a dashboard called Advance here in Alabama that was based on an older product called CARE, which provides very quick frequency analysis of a lot of different factors for citations, for crashes, for crime reporting. So you can see things like what days of the week you're writing things, what times of day you're seeing crashes, that sort of thing. But when you look at data within this system, you don't really have any idea unless you have your goals open next to it, where you are in terms of those goals. And you have to provide those two things together. And so until you do that, the information is sort of contextless. So that system has custom reports, so you can be set up to email a particular report. But when you get the email, it doesn't tell you that your crashes went up by 5 and that has some sort of impact. You have to provide that context. The reports are usually based on old paper reports that were manually generated. So people have been using a report for years and they just want that same report. But it does provide some statistics for crashes and citations, and it's updated daily typically. So using that as an idea and something we wanted to expand on, we looked at the process for building this system. So the big processes that we have, or the major pieces, we have to import the data. This is meant as a state level system to be able to import data from different data sources. We have at CAPS a crash application and a citation application, but we don't expect or think that everyone in the United States is going to use this. And so for anyone who does commercial vehicle enforcement, there is a process through a software development kit to be able to translate and import your data in a system that REACH can process, so that you can set up goals. And it doesn't have to look the same way, as long as the variables are categorical, meaning that they have a finite set of potential values. So after we import that data, we have to process that data. And that's really just sort of massaging it, putting it into an ETL process to be able to be examined in a similar way that we had with the static passive system with Advance. And then we want to look at whatever goals that you as a user have set up for yourself. And then we want to be able to send notifications, and then we want to process that output and put that onto a dashboard, onto a display screen, which you'll see in just a moment. The major pieces of that is the big piece at the top is the goal system. That's the thing that sort of sets everything apart. There's the data processing piece and the data import piece that make up getting data in from different locations. And then we have notifications, we have the user interface, the maps and the charts, and then we have external system interaction, whether that be import or export, typically export. So the main screens, and I'll go through these in just a moment, are the dashboard, and that's kind of where you land when you log in. There's a goal entry screen, a goal list screen, a screen to show you each one of the goal details that you have, and we're actually in progress on some activity corridors and settings and notifications, which you'll see some examples of those in a little bit. But this is sort of the main screen, the dashboard that shows you your current goals that are active. I'm not sure if you can see the cursor or not, but you have active up here in the top right of the screen, and then you have completed, and you can toggle among those two, and I'll show the completed in just a moment. But you can see red, yellow, and green here, and the goals are actually broken down by category. So they're actually the data type of the data that you've processed in. So you can see at least if it's crashes or citations or inspections, which are the 3 main categories of data that we have. You can see the data goals list here, and that lists all the goals that you have, and you can search by name, or you can sort by when they expire or what type they are. And then as you select each one of these, you can see the count values over here, and then all the values. Since this is a below goal, you can have above goals or below goals. all the goals that are below that particular pointer in green, and then you have a blue line that shows you, where that particular goal is. So anything above that is going to be red, or going to be something that's going to be needs to be addressed. So that is the current goals, or the active goals. The main difference between the current and the active, or the completed goals, is that you don't have anything in yellow once you've actually completed the goals. We can't give you any sort of warnings because the time has already passed, but the display is very similar. So the big process and the main crux of the entire system is the goal entry. So this is not just a data collection system, but it's mainly a comparison system of the goals that you have available. So for goals, you provide a name, a data source, and that could be crashes or citations or inspections, a group by, and that'll basically be how you actually want to display the variable in the goal, because you can pull from any one of the categorical variables that are available. You have your goal value, whether you want that to be above or below. For crashes, probably below some value, and inspections is probably above some value, because you want to have a minimum or a maximum. Then your interval, you can have daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly goals. And then there are filters, which are optional, and you can have those to limit the values that actually contribute or count against that particular goal. And then finally, this is fairly recent, there are user customizable goal tags. So if you want to assign different tags, whether it be work zone, weather, etc., to any number of sub goals, you can search by just those and group them. We're sort of open to ideas on goal membership in terms of tags, because people wanted ways to categorize them and put them together, and tags are sort of a simple way to let people sort of go wild with how they'd like to organize things, because enforcing one sort of structure or hierarchy for goal organization has a mutually exclusive effect on the other. So you can't have them be in multi-memberships, but with tags, you can do whatever you want. So this is an example of the goal entry screen, made to be pretty simple. An example of a goal entry would be, let's say you want to have commercial vehicles where the calls a unit was in pre-work zone, and you want that to be quarterly. And your data would come from your crash. You would group by, if you had a variable called this in your data set, work zone involved. Your target would be below 500, for instance, and your interval would be quarterly, and you could have it as recurring if you'd like. And so your CMV calls a unit would be, the value would be yes. So you would count only values that had that particular variable as that value. And then work zone involved would also be yes. And so you have a lot of customization in the process, because not everyone's data looks exactly the same. So as long as you have categorical data, then you should be able to build a filter or build a goal entry that matches what you actually want to track or set a goal for. And this is fairly new. One thing that we'd had feedback on is, I really don't want to enter my goals over and over and over again. I like this goal that I have, but I really just want to lower it by 50 and have that as sort of a stretch goal or a secondary goal. So there's the option of bringing up your current goal list and cloning any number of them, and you can modify any one of the smaller aspects of the goal. So you can lower it by 50, raise it by 50, change the interval, things like that. So you can you have a little bit of customization. So some people have talked about having sort of optimistic goals and pessimistic goals, and then sort of a goal in the middle, so they can see, if they wanted to group them by their optimistic goals, they could see, well, how well are we doing based on how well we thought we could possibly do versus, how we thought it was going to be in the worst. And you can have as many as you'd like, and you can group them how you want. This is an example of the goal list. So you can see here in the table view that you have your data set, your goal name, start date and end date, your target, which is whether it be above or below, the goal value that you have, and then we have the tags, and then delete function over here. But we also have added just recently the clone function, so you can go to your goal list and clone those at any time. This is an example of the goals detail screen. So for a specific goal, exactly the one that I specify the example for, you can see here that we've grouped by whether or not the vehicle is a causal unit. So you can have the goal be limited by one thing, but still see the other values of the variables. So you can see sort of what the max gain is, or what the relative frequency is for other things. So you may have variables that, if you just ignored the other instances of them, you may see an overrepresentation in the frequencies of a commercial vehicle versus non-commercial vehicle. So it just gives you an idea, where should I be expecting this goal to land based on what's happening with other values of that variable. It's not necessarily a statistical tool, but it does give you frequency information that can give you an idea of what's actually happening within the data. We do have an option, as we do for advanced, which is the static system, to export the data that you see here to a comma separated values file or an Excel file, or just to export this photograph of a chart, because a lot of people will include these in reports or status updates and things like that. So we have that as an option. This is just an example showing that full screen, so you wouldn't have to scroll through because this is the aspect ratio here. But any location data that we have that's broken down by counties, as you select those values in the chart, it'll actually highlight the counties, and we have all 50 states. So any county-based variables that are in there will actually show up and highlight just the counties, just so you have a general idea location-wise if the counties are contiguous, non-contiguous, and where they are other than the state. So I'll skip past that. One thing that we have looked at is on the goal creation aspect, just being able to get an idea of what goals may be reasonable versus non-reasonable. This is an analysis tool, and we have this sort of grayed out over here because these parameters are specific in analysis, but we didn't want to show those. But really what this does is it shows you a heat map for 3 of the major metropolitan areas in the state of Alabama, to give you an idea. And this is a very broad map, but if you zoom in, you'll get very hex-based fine detail on where these things are happening. Just to give you an idea, if you wanted to do a county-based goal, what the frequency of those things are based on the historical data. So it's really just to give you context. It's sort of a duplicate of the mapping ability that we have in another system, but that's why you don't have to leave and go to another system to be able to get that analytics background. So as I keep using the word goals, but one of the goals of the REACH process was to build a system that was interactive, but only passively if you wanted it to be that way. So we have the process of email notification, and we're working through the actual specifics of setting up user customization for an email notification. One of the things we're going to have is where you can only specify a particular tag, or only get email updates when things have changed, so you're not getting bombarded, because there's a certain sweet spot where if you're getting an email every day, at some point you will probably start to ignore that email, or it will find its way into your trash folder more often than not, because it becomes spam. So really you only need to know when things have changed, because otherwise it is in the same state as when you left it before. So in any goals that you had, as the state would change, you would get an email that would show you the name, it would show you the start and the end date of the goal, and it would show you the status change from the previous status to the current status, and it would show you the value, and it would give you just some goal context information. Looking at the user profile, one of the major, I think these are out of order. One of the major things in the user profile is to show a breakdown of all the goals that you have available personally that you've created. And the circle that you see here is the breakdown of the membership of the goals by data type. So you can see how many crash goals you have versus inspections versus citations, any of the data sets that you have available. There is a calendar view also, so you can look at the calendar very quickly and see when you have goals expiring, how many goals you have active as of a current date, and you can click on each one of the days in the calendar and see all the goals that you have that are going on at that particular time, just to give you some situational awareness of where things are. That is essentially the REACH system. We're still in active development. We have changes pretty much every day in terms of features. The tags feature was something that we added about two and a half weeks ago, based on some feedback we had on a bi-weekly call that we have with some FMCSA partners and some state partners. So any feedback here from anyone in the audience would be fantastic. But we would like to say thanks to FMCSA, the folks at the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, the Arkansas Highway Police, the Mississippi Highway Safety Patrol, and the Georgia Department of Public Safety, because they've all provided really great feedback, both from the law enforcement side and also from the data analytics side, to help us with this process. So with that, I'll open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy. Really like the tool. I think one of the especially interesting pieces for me anyway was the ability for the user to build their own goals.
Mm-hmm.
and then change their goals or clone their goals. It's really interesting. I'll ask a couple questions while people are thinking about their questions. People, please either type in questions into the chat box or unmute yourself and ask questions. Jeremy, is the tool in use so that police departments are actually using it and testing it now?
So it is in use, but it changes on a pretty frequent basis. We have, I'd say, probably about 10 to 15 users between federal personnel at FMCSA, pretty much anyone who joins the call, we've been giving access to, just to play around with a standard data set, just to build goals, because that's really the workflow that we want to try to optimize towards. But there are people in Alabama that have access and that are using it at the state level. And then there are people in Georgia, I believe, that have access at this point. And we continue to solicit for feedback, but most of what we hear is customization things like with the tags. So yes, there are some using it, but it's not in a point where it's actually active at this stage, mainly because we haven't fully integrated with the data sets in the initial pilot locations that we're looking to go to.
Uh-huh. And the data sets, are you pulling them from the state or nationally?
The state.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was that there are national aggregation methods for crashes, and there are national aggregation methods for inspections. And those data sets are good, but they are also aggregated in a way that may leave a field out that you may think is a contributing aspect to a particular crash. So
Mm-hmm.
you may have 500 or 600 fields in your crash report in your state, and the submission process for the federal crash, takes some subset of that. And that's a reasonable thing, because you don't necessarily want to take every single field. You have to have a standard data set. What the REACH system is really meant to do is to recognize that each state has some reason that they've built a crash report specifically. I think that's probably the biggest thing, because it's sort of guided by MUC, the Model Minimum Uniform Crash Criteria, but there's also a lot of deviation from it. So different people collect different fields for different reasons. And so there's a lot of local useful data that's there that isn't necessarily collected when you aggregate those things at a federal level. So really what this is meant to do is, if you have a particular field that you've added, then you can include that field as part of your goals system. Whereas if you only relied on federal data, then you may not pass that field along, and therefore wouldn't be able to use it in any sort of federally consolidated tool.
That's great. And it seems like it's designed so that that can vary from state to state based on their own crash report.
Right. So it would essentially, the process would be, we would give you the instructions on how to deploy this locally, at least in a place where it would be able to access the data that you would need to be able to access with the crashes, inspections, and citations, and also provide instructions on how to extract that data in a way that REACH can understand it. It doesn't necessarily have to be put into a particular data format. REACH just needs to know how to interpret the data that you have. But as long as you have regular categorical values that you'd like to look at, basically fields with drop downs and static values that aren't just free text, that you can sort of put a box around the particular values that you could possibly get, then you could include those as a goal value. And it's not necessarily saying, REACH will only do the raw frequency counts of crashes. If you have a variable for color of the trunk carpet or something that you wanted specifically, and you have that as a categorical variable in your report, you could have that as a goal value.
That's great. Do folks have questions for Jeremy? You can unmute yourself or type into the chat box. While people are thinking of their questions, one more from me. One of the things that we've learned about law enforcement is that they desperately need this data, but they haven't received a lot of training in data analysis and data use, and so it's a challenge to find just the right line in order to support them in a way that's easy for them to use. Mm-hmm. How have you found that as you're testing this with law enforcement?
So that is a challenge, because numbers are very deceptive sometimes. If you have an increase of 3 crashes from one year in a particular county to the next, that may seem like a worse outcome. And if you're looking at it from a simple frequency count, then it is. But if you look at the actual statistical values, depending on the rate, depending on increases of million vehicle miles traveled, things like that, it may have been an inevitable thing, just a random occurrence that contributed to those increases in numbers. I think the biggest thing is to try to temper the expectations and look at things, and that's something I didn't necessarily go into, look at things from the perspective of rate, because some of the CVSP goals are actually made in terms of what is the rate of crashes over million vehicle miles traveled, which is a more informative metric, because one of the biggest contributing factors, if not the biggest contributing factor to a crash, is that there are people on the road. And so the more miles that are driven in aggregate, if me as an individual, if I drive more miles, I'm more likely to get in a crash because my exposure risk goes up. If I never drive, then I won't be involved in a crash unless, a car just careens off the road and hits my parked vehicle in my driveway. So I think that's been the biggest challenge that we've seen, not even specifically with this tool, but just sort of tempering the expectations, because it's very easy to say these crashes went up by 40% this year. Well, if you only had, 2 or 3, that number may be within, margin of error, or may have just been random occurrence.
Right.
So you have to sort of say your treatment may not be making the difference you think it is, and it may also be. So it's sort of tough. I mean, it's you have sort of a dichotomy here where you have every life that you can save and every crash that you can prevent has a positive and appreciable effect, but also you have to look at what is the opportunity cost with any particular treatment mechanism that you're going to use, whether it be putting officers somewhere, or hiring more officers or something like that. How effective is that treatment? How can you actually show that?
Yeah. Any comments or questions from participants? Jeremy, I think you've answered all their questions, and that's why we don't have any.
Fantastic. I don't think I've ever done that before.
Thanks very much. I thought that was really interesting and informative, and look forward to hearing about it as you continue to deploy it.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, everyone, for your time and attention.
You're welcome. So folks, next week is the last in our webinar series. It will be the 9th session, and it's a little bit different than the ones that we've held thus far. So this last one is an online forum, and it's designed for anybody that's participated in a webinar or used the CV-STAC website or attended the 2016 summit. And what we're looking to do is to gather feedback on topics and strategies and what's been helpful and where the concerns have been and what are the needs for the future. What we're going to do is pull all of the information together into a white paper, bridging the gap, how universities and law enforcement can share resources, utilize expertise, and improve commercial motor vehicle safety. And that was the goal of this project. And so we're really eager to garner some feedback from all of you about what's been useful, what's been helpful, what's happened, what would you like to see in the future. If other regions of the country were going to do similar things, what would you like them to do? So I hope that you'll join us next Wednesday for active dialogue and participation webinar, different than some of the others. And Jeremy's webinar will be posted on the CV-STAC website in the next day or two, both the presentation as well as a recording of his presentation. So if folks have interested in looking back at a piece of it, or if you know somebody else that was interested but wasn't able to participate today, please guide them to the CV-STAC website. And we hope that you'll join us next week for the last one. And thanks everybody for participating. We really appreciate your input. Have a great day.